The World Cup 2026 is in full swing, and while everyone is talking about Mbappe chasing Messi into the record books, refereeing decisions, hydration breaks, VAR, tickets, heat, travel chaos, and whatever football argument has taken over your group chat today, there is another story happening around the tournament that feels much bigger than football. You are being watched. And I know that sounds dramatic. It sounds like the sort of thing someone says before they start pointing at blurry screenshots and connecting things with red string. But I mean it in the most literal, boring, public infrastructure way possible. Think about the World Cup for a second, but do not think about the pitch. Think about everything around the pitch. The roads into the stadiums, the buses, the trains, the airports, the hotels, the fan zones, the public squares, the bars, the parks, the airspace above the stadiums, the police coordination rooms, the command centers, the cameras. The World Cup 2026 is not just a football tournament anymore. It is one of the largest public security operations a country can stage, and this year it is bigger than ever. 48 teams, 104 matches, 16 cities across the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and millions of people moving through transport systems, stadiums, airports, hotels, roads, fan zones, and public spaces. It is basically a temporary city system spread across an entire continent. And when you build something of that size, you have to build security around it. That is the part I do not want to dismiss, because if your job is to keep people safe at an event like this, your job is basically to sit in a room and imagine every terrible thing that could happen before it happens. That is not paranoia. That is the job. You have drones now, you have cyber attacks, you have ticket scams, you have crowd surges, you have protests, you have heads of state, you have teams traveling between cities, you have hotels full of players, you have broadcasters, you have tourists who do not know the transport system. You have people drinking all day in the sun and then deciding they are tactical geniuses. You have all the ordinary chaos of public life multiplied by global attention. Of course, there is security. But what exactly is happening with the surveillance, and what are we learning to accept as normal? Because this is where the World Cup gets uncomfortable. A global event creates the perfect emotional conditions for surveillance to feel sensible. Everyone wants the day to work. Everyone wants to feel safe. Nobody wants to be the person saying, actually, can we talk about data retention, while thousands of people are trying to get through a stadium gate? And that is how this stuff slips into ordinary life. Not always through some big villain moment, more often through convenience, fear, celebration, and a very reasonable-sounding sentence like, we're just doing this to keep people safe. That sentence can be true. It can also be doing a lot of work. In the U.S., the White House has a FIFA World Cup task force coordinating federal efforts for the tournament, including planning around safety, security, transport, and tourism. That sounds normal, because for an event this big, coordination is normal. But coordination also means information sharing. It means agencies learning how to work together at speed. It means systems being tested under pressure. It means cities, police departments, private companies, and federal bodies all building a temporary security machine around a public celebration. And the thing about temporary security machines is that they do not always disappear when the party is over. That is the bit I cannot stop thinking about. Because after the final whistle, fans remember the football. Institutions remember the operation. Fans remember the goals, the penalties, the group stage chaos, the bad refereeing, the player who became a meme, the moment everyone in the pub lost their minds. Security systems remember something else. They remember crowd patterns, vehicle movements, drone incidents, camera performance, agency coordination, software capability, vendor reliability, protest risks, transport pressure, threat assessments. A fan goes home with a shirt. A police department goes home with a case study. And that case study can become the argument for doing it all again. That is why the World Cup is such a powerful surveillance moment. The public experiences it as emotion. The system experiences it as rehearsal. Look at automatic license plate readers. Wired mapped 1,181 ALPR cameras within 5 miles of the 11 U.S. World Cup stadiums. These are cameras that can log license plates and, depending on the system and who operates it, help build a picture of where vehicles have been and when. Now imagine you are driving to a match. You are thinking about parking, tickets, whether your phone battery will survive the day, whether your team is going to embarrass you in public. You're not thinking, how many databases might my car pass through on the way there? But that is the point. Surveillance that blends into the journey does not feel like surveillance. It feels like scenery. The same thing happens with cameras in public spaces. One camera outside a stadium feels obvious. 10 cameras feel normal. A network of cameras connected to police systems feels like something most people will not even notice until they are told to notice it. And if nothing bad happens, everyone says the system worked. Which is another uncomfortable thing about security. It has this strange built-in logic where nearly every outcome can justify expansion. If nothing happens, the system worked and deserves to be kept. If something does happen, the system was not enough and needs to grow. That does not mean security is fake. It means security needs limits, because without limits, it has a natural appetite. Then there is the drone piece. Again, I completely understand why drones are a serious concern around packed stadiums. This is not 2012, where a drone felt like a slightly annoying gadget someone got for Christmas. Drones are now part of modern conflict, policing, disruption, and surveillance. A drone over a packed stadium is not cute. It is a problem. But once you create no-drone zones, you also create enforcement systems. You need monitoring, detection, interception, penalties, coordination between aviation authorities, law enforcement, and local agencies. And I'm not saying that should not exist. I am asking what remains after it exists. Because every time a city prepares for a mega event, there's a chance for new technology to move from too controversial to already installed. That is the little political magic trick of big events. They turn future infrastructure into urgent infrastructure. Something that might have taken years of debate suddenly has a deadline. The match is coming. The visitors are coming. The cameras need to be ready. The software needs to be tested. The officers need to be trained. The contractor needs approval. The command center needs to work. And nobody wants to be the person who slowed it down. This is how the public gets bypassed without anyone needing to technically hide anything. It is not always secrecy. Sometimes it is speed. Sometimes it is complexity. Sometimes it is the fact that the average person does not have the time or energy to follow procurement documents, council meetings, data sharing agreements, vendor contracts, policing frameworks, and aviation restrictions, while also trying to live their life. And then, by the time people notice, the system is already there. Kansas City is a really good example of where this debate is heading. AP reported that officials had been preparing to equip some public buses with facial recognition software, partly expected before the World Cup, although the rollout was delayed. The idea was to identify banned riders or missing persons. Supporters described it as a safety measure. Critics saw it as a line being crossed in public transport. And this is exactly how surveillance expands. It arrives with a sympathetic use case. Find the missing person, stop the banned rider, protect passengers, prevent violence. Who wants to argue against that? But then you have to ask what happens once face recognition is normal on buses. A bus is not a border checkpoint. It is not a prison. It is not a military base. It is where people go to work, school, hospital appointments, shops, matches, friends' houses. If public transport becomes a place where your face can be scanned against a watch list, that changes the feeling of public life. Even if you have done nothing wrong. Especially if you have done nothing wrong. Because this is the mistake people make when they say, if you have nothing to hide, why are you worried? Privacy is not only about hiding bad behavior. It is about having room to exist without being constantly interpreted by a system. There is a difference between being seen by another person and being processed by infrastructure. A steward seeing you at a gate is one thing. A camera network, license plate logs, police databases, ticketing data, drone monitoring, facial recognition pilots, AI video tools, and interagency information sharing is something else. And once those systems connect, you are not just attending a football match, you are moving through a monitored environment. That is where the phrase mass surveillance becomes less dramatic than people think. It does not have to mean one giant evil screen with everyone's face on it. It can mean lots of ordinary systems layered on top of each other until public life becomes searchable. The road sees your car. The bus may see your face. The stadium sees your ticket. The fan zone sees the crowd. The police system sees the risk. The vendor sees the contract. The government sees the successful operation. And the public sees football. That split is the story. Paris showed us how quickly a mega event can become a testing ground. During the 2024 Olympics, France used algorithmic video surveillance on a trial basis. Le Monde reported that hundreds of cameras were connected to AI software designed to detect things like abandoned objects, falls, and crowd movements. Again, you can hear the safety case immediately. Nobody wants an abandoned bag ignored in a packed transport hub. Nobody wants crowd crushes. Nobody wants emergency services guessing. But there were concerns around transparency, timing, legal process, and whether people really knew when these systems were active. And after the games, officials debated whether to extend the technology. That is the pattern. The event creates the excuse. The trial creates the evidence. The evidence creates the precedent. The precedent becomes the new normal. And the public only realizes the threshold moved after it has already moved. That is why I think the World Cup 2026 matters beyond football. It is not because every camera is evil. It is not because every police officer is doing something wrong. It is not because safety is fake. It is because real safety concerns are the easiest way to make surveillance feel morally unquestionable. If you challenge it, people can make you sound reckless. Do you not want people to be safe? Do you not care about terrorism? Do you not care about children? Do you not care about crowd crushes? Do you not care about drones? And suddenly the debate is over before it begins, because nobody wants to be positioned as anti-safety. But being pro-safety should not mean being pro-unlimited monitoring. A serious society should be able to hold both thoughts at once. Yes, protect people, and yes, prove that the tools used to protect them do not quietly become permanent systems of control. That should not be controversial. But somehow it is, because surveillance always borrows virtue from the thing it claims to protect. At the World Cup, it borrows the virtue of football, celebration, national pride, families, tourism, unity, flags, songs, the emotional high of millions of people caring about the same thing at the same time. The state feels friendlier when it is wearing a high-vis jacket outside a stadium. The camera feels less threatening when everyone is smiling under it. The checkpoint feels less political when there is music playing. And that is why public consent during a mega event is not the same as public consent in ordinary life. We are not making decisions in a quiet room, we are making them inside the noise of a global celebration. Most people are not consenting to the surveillance architecture. They are consenting to getting through the day. They want to find the right entrance. They want to get their kid through the crowd. They want to avoid missing kickoff. They want to get home safely. They want the trains to run. They want the match to happen. That is normal. That is human. But systems are very good at using normal human priorities to become background. And once surveillance becomes background, it becomes very difficult to roll back. Because then you are not arguing about whether it should be introduced, you are arguing about whether it should be removed. And removal always sounds riskier. If you take away the camera and something happens, someone gets blamed. If you keep the camera and nothing happens, everyone moves on. That is the ratchet effect. Security expands in moments of fear or spectacle, then rarely shrinks with the same energy. And the people most affected are usually not the people writing the policies. A wealthy tourist with a hospitality ticket experiences security as convenience. A protester experiences it as monitoring. A migrant family may experience it as danger. A teenager from a heavily policed neighborhood experiences it as more of the same. A vendor experiences it as opportunity. A police department experiences it as capability. A technology company experiences it as proof of concept. Same infrastructure, different reality. That is why safety is never neutral. It depends who gets protected, who gets watched, who gets flagged, who gets misidentified, who gets searched, who gets remembered by the system afterwards. And yes, some people will say, well, that is the price of hosting something this big. Maybe. But then say that openly. Say the price is more surveillance. Say the price is more data collection. Say the price is more police coordination. Say the price is new technology in public space. Say the price is that systems introduced for the World Cup might still be useful to authorities afterwards. Do not hide it behind vibes. Do not call everything safety and then act like the public is unreasonable for asking what the word includes. Because the real issue is not whether the World Cup should be secured. Of course it should. The issue is whether security has become the language we use when we do not want to admit we are building systems of control. That is where I think the controversy actually is. The World Cup gives surveillance a permission structure. It creates a moment where the public is emotionally distracted, institutions are under pressure, companies can demonstrate their tools, and governments can expand coordination in the name of protecting the event. And maybe some of it is necessary. Maybe some of it is proportionate. Maybe some of it goes away afterwards. But maybe is doing far too much work for something this powerful. Before the tournament ends, people should know what was deployed, where it was deployed, who operated it, what data was collected, how long it will be kept, which agencies can access it, which private companies are involved, whether it can be used for unrelated investigations, whether immigration authorities can access any of it, whether protesters are monitored differently, whether false positives are recorded, and whether city councils get a vote before temporary systems become ordinary policing. Those are not fringe questions. Those are basic democratic questions. And if the answer is don't worry, it's just for the World Cup, that is not enough. Because history is full of temporary measures that became permanent habits. The final whistle does not delete a database. The closing ceremony does not cancel a contract. The flags coming down do not untrain a police department. The fans going home do not erase the argument that the technology worked. That is why I think the World Cup 2026 is normalizing mass surveillance, not because every single person walking into a stadium is necessarily being facially scanned. We should be careful with claims like that, but because the tournament is making a much larger, monitored environment feel ordinary. Cameras on the roads, cameras near stadiums, drone enforcement in the air, police coordination across agencies, AI tools being tested in public life, transport surveillance being debated around host cities, private security technology being sold as public safety, a continent-sized event becoming a showcase for how much monitoring people will tolerate when fear and celebration arrive together. And the most unsettling part is that most people will not experience it as oppressive. They will experience it as a smooth day out. That is how normalization works. Not with a dramatic announcement, not with a villain's speech, not with everyone suddenly realizing they live in a surveillance state. It happens when you stop noticing the cameras. It happens when a no-drone zone feels obvious. It happens when your car being logged feels like traffic management. It happens when facial recognition is described as a pilot. It happens when a temporary command center becomes a model. It happens when the public is told the system worked, but not shown what the system kept. And once people get used to being watched during moments of joy, it becomes easier to watch them during moments of dissent. That is the bit that should make us pause. Because the tools built for celebration do not only work during celebration. A camera does not know whether you are walking to a football match or a protest. A license plate reader does not know whether you're going to a stadium or a meeting. A database does not know whether its future user has good intentions. The safeguards matter because the context can change. Today it is fans, tomorrow it is protesters. Next week it is migrants. Next year it is another emergency. And every time the system can say, we already have the tools. That is why this debate has to happen while the lights are still on and the crowd is still cheering. Waiting until after the event is almost useless, because by then the story has moved on. The public has gone back to work. The media has found a new drama. The people who benefited from the infrastructure are writing their reports. The time to ask what a system is doing is before everyone agrees it was a success. We should be able to enjoy the football and still ask who is watching the crowd. We should be able to want safety and still demand limits. We should be able to host the world without quietly teaching the world that mass surveillance is just the price of a good time. Because if the cameras stay, if the data stays, if the contracts stay, if the coordination stays, if the public gets used to all of it, then the most important legacy of the World Cup might not be the goals. It might be the new definition of normal. And I want to know where people draw the line on this. If all of this keeps people safe for one summer, is it worth it? And if some of it stays after the football is gone, do we still call it safety, or do we finally call it control?